I grew up in a house that my parents had bought when I was 3 years old, which means by the time I was old enough to have real memories of it, the house was already mine in the way that childhood homes become yours. I knew every sound of it, the specific creak of the third stair from the bottom, the way the boiler kicked on at 2 in the morning with a sound like a single knock from somewhere behind the kitchen wall, the particular pitch of the wind through the gap in the living room window that my dad had been meaning to fix for as long as I could remember. I knew all of it the way you know a place you have lived in since before you had the language to describe what you were experiencing. It was just home. It was just what everything sounded like and felt like and was. I am telling you this because I want you to understand that when something was different in that house, I knew. Not because I was particularly perceptive or particularly cautious, just because I had been calibrated to that specific environment for long enough that anything outside the calibration registered immediately, the way a wrong note registers to someone who has heard the same song their whole life. I was 14 years old when I started noticing the light under the door of the spare room. The spare room was at the end of the upstairs hallway. It had been used as a guest room when my grandparents visited, but they had both passed away by the time I was 10. And after that, it became a room nobody had much reason to go into. My parents kept some boxes in there, and a fold-out bed that stayed folded, and a wardrobe full of old clothes, and that was it. The door was always closed. I walked past it every night, going to my bedroom, and every morning going to the bathroom, and I had never in my life had any particular feeling about it in either direction. It was just the spare room, just a closed door at the end of a hallway. On a Tuesday night in October, I was coming back from the bathroom at around 2 in the morning, and I looked down the hallway the way you look when you are half asleep and not paying deliberate attention to anything, and I saw light coming from under the spare room door. I stopped walking. I stood in the hallway in the dark, and I looked at the thin strip of yellow light coming through the gap at the bottom of the spare room door, and I went through the obvious explanations immediately. My parents were in there for some reason. One of them had gotten up in the night to get something from the boxes. The bulb had somehow activated on its own, which I knew was not possible, but listed anyway. A streetlight from outside was coming in through the spare room window at an angle that produced a strip of light visible under the door from where I was standing. I stood there for about a minute. The light did not change. It was steady and warm and yellow, and it was not the cold white of a streetlight, and it was not the kind of light that flickers or shifts. It was the light of a room with its overhead bulb on. I went to my parents' room and opened their door. They were both asleep. I could hear my father's breathing and see the shape of them, both in the bed in the way you can see people in a room when your eyes have adjusted to the dark. Neither of them had been up. I went back into the hallway and looked at the spare room door. The light was still there. I want to tell you that I was brave enough to open the door. I was not. I was 14 years old, and it was 2 in the morning. And something was wrong in a way I could not account for. And I went back to my bedroom, and I got into bed, and I pulled the covers up, and I lay there until it was light outside before I got up again. In the morning, I went to the spare room and opened the door. The room was exactly as it always was. Boxes, fold-out bed, wardrobe. The overhead light was off. The bulb was cold when I touched it. I looked at the window and the angle of the morning light coming through it, and I tried to find a position in the hallway from which that window could produce the strip of light I had seen under the door the night before. I could not find one. I did not tell my parents. I did not tell anyone. I told myself it had been a dream or a half-awake trick of my eyes or something in the light from outside that I had not correctly identified, and I put it away and went about my life. 3 weeks later, I saw it again. Same time, same quality of light, same steady yellow warmth under the door of the room that had nobody in it. I stood in the hallway for longer this time. I watched it for several minutes, and I kept looking back at my parents' door to reassure myself that they were still asleep and not somehow in the spare room without me knowing. Their door was closed. The light under the spare room door did not change. This time I made myself walk toward it. I got about halfway down the hallway and I stopped. Not because anything happened. Nothing happened. Nothing made a sound, nothing changed, Nothing gave me a reason to stop. I just stopped. My feet stopped, and I stood there, and I looked at the light under the door from halfway down the hallway, and I could not make myself go further. I went back to bed. It happened 6 more times over the next 2 years, always in the early hours of the morning, always the same quality of light, always when my parents were asleep and accounted for. I told my mother about it once, about a year in, and she went very quiet in the way that I had learned by then. Meant she was deciding whether to tell me something. She said that she had seen it too, twice, that she had gone back to bed both times. She did not offer an explanation, and I did not ask for one, and we did not discuss it again. When I left for university, I did not miss the spare room or the light under its door. What I missed was everything else about the house. The third stair creak, and the boiler knock, and the gap in the living room window. The parts that were mine, and known, and safe. The spare room had never been entirely mine. I understood that by the time I left. Something in it had its own occupancy that had nothing to do with our family or our boxes, or the fold-out bed that stayed folded. It had its own hours and its own reasons for the light, and it had decided for the 2 years it was my problem to keep those reasons to itself. My parents still live in that house. The spare room door is still at the end of the hallway. I asked my mother about it a few years ago, casually, and she said she had not seen the light for a long time, maybe years. I asked her if that was reassuring. She said she was not entirely sure. I want to start with the layout of the house, because it matters for understanding exactly how wrong the knocking was. The house was a detached single-family home on a quarter-acre lot. The nearest neighboring house was about 40 feet to the right, and another 30 or so to the left. The walls of our house were exterior on all 4 sides, meaning none of them shared a surface with any other building. There was no attached garage. There were no shared utility corridors or party walls. The exterior walls of our house had open air on the outside of all of them. I am being this specific because when I tell you about the knocking in the walls, I need you to understand that there was nothing on the other side of those walls that could have produced what we were hearing. No pipes shared with a neighbor, no building against the exterior, no structural reason for what happened. We moved in when I was 8 years old. My parents, my older sister, and me. The house was a good house by any objective measure, and my parents were happy with it, and my sister and I were happy with it. And for the first several months, nothing happened that was worth noting. The knocking started in the winter of our first year there. It came from inside the walls. The interior walls, the ones that divide the rooms from each other, not the exterior ones. It came from the wall between the upstairs hallway and the main bedroom. 3 knocks, evenly spaced, like someone rapping their knuckles on a door. Not a pipe sound, not a structural sound, not a sound that had the irregular quality of a building cooling down at night. 3 deliberate, evenly spaced knocks. Then, nothing. Then sometime later, 3 more. My father went through the house looking for the source the first time it happened. He checked the heating system and the plumbing and the attic access. He found nothing. The second time it happened, he knocked back on the wall from his side, which I have thought about many times since because I think knocking back is the wrong move, and my father would tell you the same thing now. He knocked back, and there was a silence of about 10 seconds, and then from inside the wall came 5 knocks instead of 3. After that, the pattern changed. It was no longer consistent. Sometimes 3, sometimes more, sometimes a single knock from a different part of the same wall, as if whatever was producing the sound had received a communication and was responding to it. My father was a practical and rational man, and he spent the better part of 2 months trying to find the mechanical explanation. He had a contractor come through the walls, looking for anything structural that could account for it. The contractor found nothing relevant, and said the walls were in good condition, and there was nothing inside them that should be making that sound. He seemed uncomfortable by the end of the visit, in a way he did not fully explain, and he did not suggest anything further. The knocking continued through the winter and into spring, and then stopped entirely around April. We went through the summer without it, and my parents allowed themselves to believe it had been a winter phenomenon related to temperature change and contraction. which was not a satisfying explanation given that the contractor had found nothing, but was better than no explanation at all. It came back in October. By the second winter, we had developed a relationship with it that I find strange to describe, but that was genuinely how it was. We knew the knocking the way you know the boiler or the pipes, as a feature of the house rather than an event. My sister named it, the way teenagers name things to take the edge off them. She called it the boarder, as in someone who rented a room and knocked when they needed something. We never asked what it needed. Nobody wanted to find out. The worst night was in the 2nd February. I was 10 years old, and I had been asleep for a few hours when I woke up to the sound of knocking from my bedroom wall. Not the hallway wall, my bedroom wall. The knocking had never come from my bedroom before. Always the hallway wall. Always the main bedroom wall. Never mine. It was coming from the wall at the head of my bed, the wall that my pillow was against. I lay there and listened to it, and I counted 8 knocks, irregularly spaced this time. Not the deliberate 3-knock pattern, but something more like the random rap of a person shifting against a surface. And then there was a different sound, not a knock. Something that I have described to several people over the years, and that I always struggle to find the right word for. A sound like someone drawing a finger slowly down the wall from the inside. A dragging sound, deliberate and slow, and about 18 inches long, and it ended at a point on the wall that was level with my head. I got out of bed and went to my parents' room, and I slept on the floor, and I did not go back to sleep in my own room for 3 weeks. My parents took it seriously after that. They had the walls opened in 3 sections, including the section adjacent to my bedroom. The contractor who came this time was different from the first one, and he found something in the wall section near my bedroom that the first contractor had apparently missed or not mentioned. A small, hollow space that had been created somehow, not structural, not intended, more like a void that had formed between the wall cavity and the exterior sheathing. He said he had no explanation for how it had formed or what could have caused the dragging sound. He filled it in. He sealed the wall properly. He seemed to want to leave quickly. The knocking stopped after that and did not come back for the remainder of our time in the house, which was another 4 years. 4 years of nothing, of the house being just a house, of the walls being just walls. My sister still calls whatever was in those walls the boarder. She says it like it is a funny memory now. I let her. I do not find it funny. I find it the specific kind of frightening that does not wear off with time, the kind that is located in the body rather than the mind, that lives in the physical memory of lying in a bed at 10 years old with your head against a wall, and hearing something on the other side of it, dragging a finger slowly down to where you were. The contractor filled the hollow and sealed the wall, and whatever was in it either left or stopped announcing itself. I have always wondered which one it was. Before I get into this, I want to tell you something about my relationship with my grandmother because it changes the shape of the story. My grandmother died when I was 22 years old. She had been sick for about a year before she passed, and I had been close to her in the specific way that some grandchildren are close to some grandparents, the kind of close where she was a real presence in my daily life, rather than just a holiday figure. She called me every Sunday. She had done it for as long as I could remember, the Sunday call, same time every week, and I had answered it on a payphone in a dormitory hallway in college, and on my first cell phone, and on every phone I had owned since. It was as reliable and regular as anything in my life. She died on a Thursday in November. By the following Sunday, I had already started to register the absence of the call without consciously thinking about it, the way you register an empty space before you name what used to fill it. This was 2 years before what I am about to describe. I want to be clear about the timeline because it matters. I was 24 when it happened. I had moved into my first proper apartment about 3 months prior, a 1-bedroom in a city I had recently relocated to for work. I did not know the city well yet, and I did not know my neighbors yet, and the apartment was in that phase of habitation where you are still calibrating to it, still learning what it sounds like at 3 in the morning, and what the light does in the afternoon, and how much of the outside world filters through the walls. I was not entirely comfortable in it yet, but I was getting there, which is a normal experience of a new space and not something I was worried about. On a Sunday evening, approximately 2 years after my grandmother's death, I was in the kitchen of that apartment making dinner. The radio was on. It was an unremarkable evening in every particular. I was not thinking about anything unusual. I was not sad or anxious or in any kind of heightened emotional state. I was just making pasta and half listening to the radio and thinking about work the next day. I heard my grandmother's voice say my name. I want to be as precise about this as I can, because the precision is the entire story. I did not hear something that reminded me of her voice. I did not hear a sound that my grief-shaped brain perhaps translated into something familiar. I heard her voice, the specific quality of it, the particular way she said my name, the exact intonation of it that I had heard every Sunday for my entire life. Her voice, my name, spoken clearly and at a volume that suggested she was in the same room as me. I turned around. The kitchen was empty. The apartment was empty. I had been the only person in it since I came home 3 hours before. I stood in the kitchen with a wooden spoon in my hand, and I was very still for a moment, and I went through the rational explanations the way you do when something rational explanation-shaped has just happened. The radio. A neighbor's television through the wall. A sound from outside that my mind had shaped into something familiar. The specific acoustics of a new apartment, producing sounds I had not yet cataloged. I turned the radio off. The apartment was quiet. I stood and listened to the quiet for a while. Nothing. I finished making dinner and I ate it, and I went about my evening, and I did not hear it again that night. I told myself it had been the radio, that some combination of sounds had produced something my ears had interpreted as familiar in the specific way that grieving people's brains sometimes do. This is a real phenomenon. I knew it was real. I leaned into it as an explanation because it was the only comfortable one available. 3 Sundays later, I was in the living room reading in the evening, and I heard it again. Same voice, same quality. My name in her voice from the direction of the hallway. I had the same immediate physical response. The stillness, the turning toward the sound, the finding of nothing. The apartment was empty. The television was off. The hallway was empty. I sat in the living room, and I did not move for a while after that. I thought about the Sundays. I had not consciously registered the pattern until that second time, but once I registered it, I could not unregister it. 2 Sundays, the day she had called me every week of my life. Her voice in my apartment on the day she used to call. The 3rd time was 4 weeks later. Also a Sunday. Also the evening around the time she would have called. Also my name in her voice from a different part of the apartment. The hallway the 2nd time. The living room doorway the 3rd time. As if whatever was producing the voice was moving slightly each time. Getting slightly closer to wherever I was. I called my mother after the 3rd time. I told her what had been happening. My mother was quiet for a long time, and then she asked me what my grandmother's voice sounded like when she heard it, and I described it, and my mother said yes. She said it exactly right, the specific word my grandmother used when she said my name, a particular diminutive she had used only with me since I was small, a private name that nobody else used. I had not told my mother that detail before she confirmed it. I had described the voice, and she had said yes, and used the specific word back to me. My mother had heard the voice too, in her own house, on Sundays, in the weeks after my grandmother died. She had heard it twice, and had not told anyone, because she did not know how to describe it in a way that would not sound like grief, making her imagine things. I heard the voice 7 times in total, over a period of about 4 months. It was always a Sunday, and always the evening, and always my name, and always her voice, without any variation or distortion that would have allowed me to dismiss it as something else. After the 7th time, it stopped. I do not know why it stopped. There was nothing I did differently, nothing that changed in the apartment or in my life that seemed to correspond to it. I have not heard it since, and it has been several years. I have thought about those 7 Sundays many times. I have thought about my mother hearing it too and not saying anything. I have thought about my grandmother and whether she knew she had died, or whether on some level the habit of the Sunday call was strong enough to outlast the fact of her dying by a few months. I do not know what the right framework is for what happened. I do not have a tradition or a belief system that accounts for it cleanly, and I have not been able to build one. What I know is that on 7 Sunday evenings in an apartment I had just moved into, a voice I recognized beyond any doubt said my name and was not there when I turned around. And that by the 7th time, I had stopped being frightened by it. What I felt by the 7th time was something closer to gratitude, which is not a word I expected to use when I started telling this story, but which is the most honest word I have.